You know that specific feeling when you realize someone needs you a little bit less than they used to, not dramatically and not all at once, just slightly less and then slightly less again. The calls that used to come first, the way someone used to look at you when you walked through the door, the room that used to go quiet when you spoke. Now you didn't lose anything you can point to, nothing really ended and nothing was said. You just became a little less necessary and you have no idea what to do with that. Now these videos take a lot of time to do, so subscribing and also considering joining the Patreon would help a lot with making these videos. Now most people remember Toy Story as the one about the toys that come to life, but that's not what this movie is about. This movie is about you. It's about the quiet panic of watching yourself become someone the world no longer needs in the way it used to. Now Woody did not lose his job, he lost his entire identity. And if you've ever felt the specific terror of becoming slowly, politely, less necessary, then this movie was always about you too. Now to understand what is actually happening to Woody, we have to look at who he was before the Space Ranger ever arrived. Now Woody is Andy's favorite toy, the undisputed leader of the bedroom. Now he's the one organizing the meetings and delegating tasks to the plastic masses. He knows every toy by name. He pretty much runs the room. And he has done it for so long that he stopped noticing he was performing. But look closely at his behavior in the opening scenes. Woody does not actually have a role. The role has him. His entire sense of self, his worth, his reason for existing is built entirely around one child's gaze. And if you asked Woody who he was outside of Andy's room, he would have no answer. There is no sentence that follows. There is no second version of himself waiting in the reserve. His creators literally named him Sheriff Woody Pride. Now his identity is not based on internal self-worth. It's built entirely on his status at the top of the social hierarchy. And you probably know exactly what that feels like. The parent whose whole sense of purpose lived inside being needed by their kids. The employee whose confidence only existed inside a job title. And the partner who only knew who they were when someone else was choosing them. Now psychologists call this the identity foreclosure. Developed by James Marcia, it describes what happens when a person commits entirely to a role without ever stepping to explore who they actually were outside of it. They look stable, dedicated, reliable, sure, but they're catastrophically fragile. Their stability is entirely borrowed from the outside. And when the environment changes, they have no internal architecture to support their existence. They have never had to ask who they are outside of this because they never needed to. Now in 1994, a Harvard development psychologist, Robert Keegan, published a landmark framework on adult development. He identified what he called a socialized mind, a state where your identity is constructed entirely by external sources. You do not author your identity, you just receive it from the expectations of your community, your relationships, and your job titles. And Keegan's research reveals something that should stop you guys cold. Because approximately 65 to 75% of adults never move past this stage.
Species do what it does, except to survive, to live, to succeed biologically. When you take this big view of our current reality, you have to also conclude that we are a species in peril.
Up to 3/4 of the adult population has no internal architecture to support their existence outside the roles they perform for other people. And you're probably reading that and thinking that this does not apply to you, but it probably does. Now Woody did not choose to be the cowboy or a leader. He was assigned those roles and built his entire psychological foundation on them. Then Buzz Lightyear lands on the bed. Buzz has lasers, wings, and a recorded mythology. He does not just compete with Woody. He makes Woody's entire category of value feel completely obsolete. And that is a thing nobody warns you about when you start to become irrelevant. It is not that someone tells you that you are being replaced. It is that you watch the room slowly stop needing what you have to offer, and nobody says a word. Now watch the scene where every toy in the room abandons Woody's orbit to gather around Buzz. Now you've been in that room, and maybe not with toys, but maybe with colleagues, maybe with your own kids, and maybe with someone you loved who started to look at something else the way they used to look at you. And that is the precise moment of social demotion, and it happens in silence. And Woody's reaction is where the movie stops being a children's story. He does not grieve, he panics, he schemes, and he sabotages. Now we watch him actively try to knock Buzz behind a desk to hide him. We usually write this off as petty jealousy, but it's not. And according to researcher Naomi Eisenberg at UCLA, the brain does not distinguish between physical and social injury. Her fMRI studies showed that the pain of being socially excluded is processed in the exact same brain regions as physical pain. Now when Woody watches Andy pick up Buzz instead of him, his brain is registering the exact same distress as a physical wound. And this triggers what psychologists call the involuntary subordinate state. When a person perceives their social status has dropped, the brain generates hypervigilance and a set of defensive behaviors aimed at restoring the lost status. Now, Woody knocking Buzz out the window is not a calculated villain arc. It is a threat-based, cortisol-driven decision that bypasses rational thought entirely. And you've done a version of this. Maybe you didn't knock anybody out the window, but you have undermined someone who made you feel replaceable. You've made yourself indispensable in ways that were not entirely healthy. You've held on tighter to something that was already starting to let go of you, and not because you're a bad person, but because your brain was trying to survive. Now this is exactly what adults do when they face the slow fade of irrelevance, the senior employee who subtly undermines the new hire in meetings, that parent who stays inappropriately involved in their adult's child's decisions, now the partner also who creates dependency rather than fostering autonomy. Now, none of these behaviors are malicious at their source, or maybe it is, it just depends on your situation, but I still think they are all desperate attempts to protect an identity from the only threat it cannot survive, the world not needing it anymore. And this leads to the most devastating realization in the entire franchise. Now, Woody's specific pain is not that Andy does not love him, it's that Andy does not need him in the same way anymore. For someone whose entire identity is built on being needed in a specific way, the distinction is absolutely terrifying. And there's no language for it, because society gives you a script for being fired, for being left, for losing someone, and it gives you nothing for becoming slowly, politely, less necessary. Psychologists call this the grief without a funeral. There is no socially sanctioned way to mourn role loss. So you suffer in isolation. You experience what researchers call temporal disorientation. You literally do not know who you are in time. Now, what do you do with a Tuesday morning when the Tuesday morning used to mean something? And what do you do with the version of yourself that was built entirely around something that no longer needs you the way it did?
The dolls must really go for you. Can you teach me that? Howdy, Bob, howdy.
Oh, shut up. You know, in a couple of days, everything will be just the way it was. They'll see. They'll see. I'm still Andy.
And so you do what most people do. You perform. You keep showing up as the old version of yourself. You keep playing the role even as the audience for it gets smaller. Now you get a little more insistent, a little more rigid, and a little more desperate to remind the room of what you used to mean to it. Because the alternative is stepping into the gap. The gap is the silence after the role ends and before the next thing starts. Most adults will do anything to avoid it, because falling into the open gap feels like dying. Now we see the shape of this loss most clearly in the Jessie flashback in Toy Story 2. Now a child grows up, a toy is forgotten, a relationship dissolves not through malice but through the actual natural movement of time. You cry at the scene because you recognize the exact shape of that polite, irreversible abandonment. The relationship that did not end, it just quietly became something smaller. The version of yourself that did not disappear, it just stopped being needed. And nobody held a funeral for it. Nobody even acknowledged what was lost. Life just kept moving, and you kept performing. And somewhere in the middle of all that, the real grief never got to happen. To survive this, you have to make what Keegan calls the subject-object shift. You have to stop being authored by the role and start authoring yourself. The role has to become something you can set down rather than something that holds you up. It takes Woody 4 entire movies to finally make this transition. And by Toy Story 4, he's no longer needed by his new kid Bonnie. He spends the film watching his star diminish. And when he finally decides to stay with Bo Peep, to stop being someone's toy and start being self-defined, the franchise frames it as liberation. Now it is actually the most psychologically brutal thing that the series has ever done. To choose yourself, you first have to admit that the role you have been clinging onto is gone forever. Now you have to grieve that role, and not just to accept the change. When Woody watches Andy drive away, he says 3 words.
So long, partner. Oh, hey, Buzz, you haven't even Bonnie's toys yet.
It is the moment of honest, finally accepted obsolescence. It's not rage, not schemes, just a quiet acknowledgement that the chapter has ended, and its ending is actually correct. Here's what that moment does not mean though. It does not mean that the transition is easy. It does not mean you will feel the phantom limb of your old identity for a long time after. It means you finally realize the role was never the point. The love was real. The connection was real. The years were real. The role was just the shape it took at the time. Most adults watching this movie never make it to Woody's resolution. They go home to the same performance of an identity that no longer quite fits. They keep making themselves useful in ways that are slowly becoming invisible. They shrink themselves to fill a space the world no longer has for them, because they have not yet asked the question that will start the process itself. The question this movie leaves you guys with is not whether you're being replaced. It's whether you actually ever knew who you were outside of the thing that is disappearing. Because if the answer is no, then the most important work of your life is not holding on. It is finally finding out. So the next time you guys feel that quiet panic of someone needing you a little bit less, do not fight to put that skeleton back into the old role. Build a new one, guys. Because building a new one is the only way you will ever actually learn how to stand on your own 2 feet.